It started with a knock on my apartment door. Not a polite tap or a delivery buzz, but the kind of knock that meant business. I opened it with a mouthful of cereal and zero expectations, only to be greeted by two soldiers in polished black uniforms and an official with a velvet-lined clipboard. They asked for Lady Eliza Marin of House Vallon. I blinked. Wrong address, I mumbled, but the official looked me dead in the eye. Are you not Eliza Marin? Technically, I was. That was my name. But I wasn't the Lady Eliza Marin they were looking for. I was just a coffee shop barista in District 12 with a broken heater and rent 2 weeks overdue. But before I could explain, one of the soldiers scanned my identification chip. It lit green. The official smiled. Congratulations, Lady Eliza. You've been selected for the crown match. I dropped my spoon. The crown match was a royal matchmaking program reserved for noble daughters across the kingdom. It wasn't romantic. It was political theater with $1 billion credits and sponsor money behind it. Each cycle, 4 elite suitors from the noble houses were chosen. One girl would be matched with them based on an algorithm supposedly more sacred than bloodlines. The result? A televised whirlwind of tradition, scandal, and strategic courtship. But the algorithm wasn't supposed to touch anyone outside the nobility. I was the daughter of 2 dead teachers with a forged surname and a grocery store loyalty card. Something had gone very, very wrong. By the time I tried to object, I was already being whisked away. They confiscated my comms, dressed me in silk, and sent a court stylist to fix my chipped nail polish. I sat on a private shuttle to the capital in stunned silence, surrounded by strangers calling me my lady like it wasn't a complete joke. I didn't belong here. But I also didn't stop it. When we landed, the palace press was already waiting. Cameras flashed as I stepped onto the marble runway like some kind of debutante. The other girls from the original pool had been dismissed, quietly and without comment. Only one girl had been selected by the system. Me. And by law, the crown match couldn't be altered once announced. I was now the legal participant. A mistake frozen in protocol. The 4 suitors stood waiting in the hall of selection. They were even more intimidating in person than they were on screen. Each one carried their own brand of danger. First was Damon. Cold, calculated, heir to House Rain. He wore his power like armor and spoke like every word was a chess move. Then there was Leo, with golden hair and a sharp smile, known for charming senators and stealing victories in the war court. Rafe was next, the youngest of the bunch and the most unpredictable. A rebel with a noble crest, infamous for skipping ceremonies and crashing airbikes. And finally, Cashin. Dark eyes. Quiet stare. Rumored to have turned down the throne itself to join the match. They lined up in front of me, each bowing in turn. I nodded, unsure whether to curtsy or run. A camera hovered. A bell rang. The match had begun. We were housed in the royal estate for the duration. I was assigned my own wing, a servant named Mara, and a tutor to catch me up on etiquette I'd never learned. I played along. What else could I do? If I admitted the mistake, I'd be sent home, and someone would start asking how my identification chip had passed the scan. There was something off about all this. Something bigger than me. So I smiled, learned how to dance in heels, and kept my mouth shut. The suitors didn't make it easy. Damon invited me to chess at midnight and used the pieces to test my knowledge of noble bloodlines. I bluffed. Leo took me to a press event and handed me the mic without warning. I improvised a speech about unity that made headlines the next day. Rafe snuck into my room with spiked cider and asked what I was hiding. I told him I snored. And Cashin? He watched me like he already knew. Like he saw right through the silken lies and knew I didn't belong. 1 week in, they were all still circling. Not one had backed off. If anything, the game was heating up. Because what started as a courtship had turned into something else. A challenge. I wasn't playing the way they expected. I didn't try to impress them. I didn't lean into tradition or flirt with protocol. I just existed on my own terms. And it drove them mad. The public adored me. The unlikely lady, they called me. The one who didn't beg to be chosen. The one who might actually choose for herself. But the longer I stayed, the more cracks I saw. There were whispers about the real Eliza Marin disappearing. About a vote in the High Court being delayed. About the algorithm being tampered with, but no one could trace how. Someone had pushed me into the spotlight on purpose. I started digging. Quietly. Casually. I asked Mara questions I pretended not to understand. I lingered in halls I shouldn't. I searched the palace archives when I was supposed to be getting fitted for another gown. What I found made my stomach drop. The algorithm wasn't hacked. It had been rewritten. Not to find the best match, but to deliver a distraction. A wild card. Me. Someone had rigged the system. Not for love, but for war. And the 4 suitors? They were more than bachelors. They were heirs to the most powerful alliances in the kingdom. If I chose one, it would shift the balance of power completely. Which meant I couldn't afford to fall for any of them. And I definitely couldn't let any of them win. I started playing my own game. If I was the glitch in their perfect system, I'd be the kind that crashed the whole thing. I stopped pretending to be overwhelmed and started leaning in. I studied court tapes, read every dossier I could get my hands on, and memorized the power maps of the noble houses. I learned which alliances were real and which ones were just for show. The 4 suitors weren't just chasing me, they were playing each other, too. I just had to stay ahead. Damon was the first to realize I was done being passive. He invited me to a formal dinner, supposedly just the 2 of us. But when I arrived, 3 council members were seated at the table. Damon gestured for me to sit, his face unreadable. "They've asked to meet the future Lady Rain," he said smoothly. I didn't blink. I smiled, sat down, and spent the next hour discussing foreign trade policies I'd crammed the night before. When they left, Damon leaned close. "Who are you really?" he asked. "You don't flinch like the others." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Leo made his move next. He brought me to a gala and made sure we were seen together under every camera in the palace. He whispered sweet things in my ear and let his hand rest a little too long on my waist. "Let them talk," he murmured, "you and I both know how to win an audience." But when he tried to kiss me behind the balcony curtain, I stepped back. "You're used to applause," I said, "but I don't perform for free." Rafe, wild and charming, didn't play by any rules. One night, he took me on a hover ride over the city, showing me the districts the nobles liked to forget. "They call this a match," he said, wind whipping through his hair. "But what they really want is control." I asked if he wanted it too. He grinned. "Not control. Chaos." He stared at me for a beat too long. "That's why I like you. You didn't come here to win. You came here to burn things down." And Cashin kept watching. Saying little. But always there. I found him in the garden one evening, sitting in silence under the moonlight. I sat beside him, neither of us speaking. After a while, he finally said, "You're not afraid of us." I shrugged. "Should I be?" He looked at me then, really looked. "They want to claim you like a title. But I see it. You're claiming something too." I met his gaze. "Maybe I am." Each of them tried to pull me in. And I let them, just enough. Enough to learn what they wanted. What they feared. What made them tick. But I never gave them what they really wanted, me. I was building my own power, quietly, behind the scenes. I charmed advisors, memorized their names and pressure points. I caught the eye of the Queen's secretary, who started slipping me unfiltered transcripts from court hearings. I had breakfast with a former match participant who told me what really happened to girls who chose wrong. I smiled through every ball, every fitting, every fake affection, and never forgot who I was. Not Lady Eliza. Just Eliza. The glitch in their design. But something was shifting. Beneath the political tension and silent power games, something real was starting to stir. With all 4 of them. They weren't just acting anymore. They were watching me not as a pawn, but as someone they couldn't predict. Damon started asking me about my past, not my title, but my thoughts, my stories. Leo stopped trying to charm me and started protecting me from the press. Rafe told me about the brother he lost in a rebellion. And Cashin, he stopped guarding his silence and started letting me into it. I didn't know when the war games turned into something warmer. I didn't plan for it. But feelings were messy. And in the palace, they were dangerous. Because while I was busy playing my own game, someone else had started playing theirs. A leak hit the press. Rumors that the match was rigged. That I was a fake. A fraud. An imposter. The palace tried to cover it up, but the whisper spread like fire. Reporters demanded statements. Nobles began to withdraw support. The Queen summoned me for a private audience. She stared at me from her obsidian throne, her eyes sharp. "Are you who you say you are?" she asked. "I never said I was anything," I replied. She smiled faintly. "That may be the smartest answer you've given." I walked out of that chamber with my position intact, for now. But I knew the palace wouldn't let this scandal slide. Someone wanted me removed. And it wasn't just about a glitch in the algorithm anymore. It was personal. The boys closed ranks. Damon pulled strings in the press. Leo had his mother, a senator, issue a public statement of support. Rafe threatened to expose the archives if I was expelled. And Cashin? He stood beside me during the next public event, silent but unwavering. The message was clear, they were with me. But alliances were fragile. And someone in the palace wanted me gone badly enough to break them. I didn't sleep the night after the Queen's audience. I stayed up pacing the carved stone floor of my chambers, going over everything I knew. Someone had rewritten the matchmaking algorithm. Someone had inserted my name into the system, fully aware it would throw everything into chaos. But why me? Why not a noble girl they could control? Unless that was the point. Maybe they didn't want control. Maybe they wanted a disruption that couldn't be traced back to them. A pawn that didn't even know she was on the board. But I wasn't a pawn anymore. I needed answers, and I knew where to start. Mara, my servant, had been with me since day one. Quiet, loyal, always 2 steps ahead. She brought me tea before I asked for it, adjusted my gowns like she'd done it for years, and never once slipped a real name or origin. So I waited until she thought I was asleep. Then I followed her. She led me through servant passages I hadn't known existed, down to a small door hidden behind an empty tapestry. I held my breath and listened as she spoke to someone on the other side, a man. Their voices were low, urgent. "She's getting too close," Mara whispered. "We knew she would," the man replied. "It's working. Keep her steady. Just a little longer." I didn't confront her then. I needed more than whispers. I needed proof. So I did what I did best, played dumb and watched everything. The suitors noticed something had shifted. Damon started pressing harder, asking why I'd never mentioned my childhood estate. I told him I didn't like talking about the past. Leo stopped bringing me to public events and started holding private dinners in his quarters, away from the cameras. Rafe stopped joking entirely. He looked at me one night and said, "Don't get caught." Then he walked away. And Cashin started asking the real questions. "Why do you know how to decrypt palace files?" He asked one evening in the garden. I paused. "Why do you?" I countered. He smiled, slow and dark. "Because I wasn't born to follow the rules." Neither was I. He nodded like he understood something I didn't dare say aloud. 2 days later, someone tried to poison my tea. It wasn't dramatic. Just a drop of clear liquid that Mara was supposed to serve me after breakfast. I saw her hesitate. I saw her eyes flick toward the tray like she didn't want to. And that's when I knew. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to warn me. I knocked the cup over by accident. Made a scene. Blamed the nausea on nerves. Hours later, Mara slipped me a note. One sentence, scrawled in rushed ink: "They want the suitors to turn on each other. You're the fuse." So that was it. I wasn't here to choose one of them. I was here to make them fight. Divide the houses. Destabilize the power. Whoever orchestrated this wanted civil war, and I was the perfect excuse. Unless I flipped the script. At the next public event, I asked for a moment at the podium. Gasps echoed around the ballroom. No one ever interrupted the host's ceremonial speech. But I stepped forward, lifted my chin, and spoke anyway. "I know you didn't expect me," I said to the sea of nobles. "I know you think I'm a mistake. But maybe the system saw something none of us did. Maybe this match isn't about bloodlines. Maybe it's about change." Silence. Tense and electric. Then applause. Polite, scattered, but growing. Later that night, I stood alone in the East Tower watching the sky burn pink over the Capitol. Cashin found me there. He didn't speak. Just stood beside me in the quiet. "You knew," I said finally. "About the plot." "I suspected." "And you didn't say anything?" "If I had, you might have run. And I needed to see what you do." I turned to face him. "And what do you see now?" He stepped closer, eyes locked on mine. Someone dangerous. Someone powerful. Someone worth following. My breath caught. Not from the words, but from the way he said them. Like he meant every syllable. Like he wasn't talking about a match anymore. I wanted to trust him. But I couldn't afford it. Not yet. The next morning, the palace was in uproar. A coded message had been intercepted. One that confirmed the algorithm rewrite. One that traced it back, not to the Queen, not to a rival house, but to the Crown's own advisory council. The enemy wasn't outside the palace. It was sitting on the throne's right hand. And the only way to survive now was to win. On my own terms. Winning meant making the palace play by my rules. I could no longer afford to just react. If I was going to survive, if I was going to expose the council, keep the kingdom from tearing itself apart, and protect the 4 men who'd somehow become more than rivals, I had to move first. So I called them. All 4. Damon, Leo, Rafe, Cashin. I asked them to meet me in the war room. Not the ballroom, not the parlor, not the curated lounges the palace kept for polite appearances. The real war room. The one with the live intel feeds and surveillance channels and maps that shifted with every political ripple in the capital. They came. Damon arrived first, arms folded, gaze sharp. You've made enemies, Eliza. Serious ones. I didn't make them, I replied. I just refused to stay where they put me. Leo came next, tense for once. If the council finds out we're working together, they already know, I cut in. They tried to kill me yesterday. Rafe leaned against the wall, hands in his pockets. Then why aren't we setting the place on fire yet? Cashin walked in last, silent as always, but his presence shifted the air. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. He just watched me. Like he was waiting to see the final version of who I'd become. I spread the evidence across the table. The intercepted code. The altered algorithm logs. The surveillance from the servant tunnels. I told them everything, how I wasn't who they thought I was, how the system had been manipulated, how the real Eliza Marin had disappeared months ago under suspicious circumstances, and how I'd been inserted as a smokescreen. And you're just now telling us this? Damon asked. I needed to be sure, I said. Leo ran a hand through his hair. So what's the play? Expose the council and risk the kingdom cracking in half? I met their eyes, one by one. We don't expose them. We bait them. Rafe grinned. Now you're speaking my language. My plan was dangerous. Reckless. And exactly the kind of thing a girl like me, someone they never saw coming, could pull off. We would leak false information. Stage a fake alliance between 2 of the houses. Make it look like Damon and Leo were about to form a superpower through marriage and trade. Meanwhile, Rafe would stir rebellion rumors in the outer districts, giving the council something to panic about. Cashin would stay silent, neutral, unaligned, until the last moment, when he'd turn the tide. And I'd announce my final decision. I would choose one of them publicly. Make it real. Make it permanent. Force the council's hand. They'd act. They'd try to stop it. And when they did, we'd be ready. The next days passed in a blur of whispered meetings and coded exchanges. I moved through the palace like a ghost wrapped in silk, playing the perfect candidate while setting the stage for the council's downfall. Rumors began to swirl. Nobles took sides. The match had become a battleground. Then the night of the final ceremony arrived. The ballroom glittered under thousands of suspended lights. Nobles, diplomats, and officials watched from balconies and velvet-lined chairs. The world was watching through broadcast screens. And I stood at the center in a gown stitched with threads of silver, my heart pounding behind polished composure. The host stepped forward. Lady Eliza, as per the match charter, you may now declare your choice. Silence fell. The camera zoomed in. The music held its breath. I looked at Damon, standing tall and proud. Then at Leo, all charm restrained behind tension. Rafe gave me a crooked smile. Cashin's eyes burned with something I couldn't name. I turned to the crowd. My choice, I said, voice steady, is none of them. Gasps broke like a wave. I won't be a prize. This was never about love. It was never about unity. It was a lie designed to divide us. But I found the truth. And I'm not afraid to name it. Chaos erupted. The host tried to speak. Guards moved. But it was too late. Screens flickered across the room, displaying the council's coded messages, their manipulation, their plan to fracture the throne. The intel we'd gathered played out for the entire kingdom to see. The council panicked. Damon stood. Leo stepped forward. Rafe threw something, a tracker jammer. Cashin moved beside me, hand on my back, voice in my ear. We have the evidence. Now we take control. That night, the council fell. By dawn, half the members had been arrested. The rest fled. The Queen issued a public statement disbanding the current advisory body and calling for a new constitutional restructure. With me as interim representative. An outsider, she said, but the only one brave enough to face the truth. And the boys? They didn't leave. Damon offered to be my advisor. Leo asked to manage communications. Rafe volunteered to guard the borders. And Cashin stayed closest of all, not as a suitor, but as something more. I didn't choose you, I said to him, later, when we stood in the war room again. You didn't have to, he replied. You were already mine. The palace never saw it coming. They thought they created a glitch. But I wasn't a mistake. I was the match. 3 weeks after the match collapsed, I was still waking up half expecting to be dragged out of the palace in handcuffs. But each morning, I was greeted with news briefings, policy requests, and a stack of encrypted messages from advisors who now answered to me. The interim government had passed. The Queen had signed off. I, Eliza Marin, still legally a nobody, had become the most powerful voice in the kingdom. And strangely enough, no one was asking me to give it back. The boys, if I could still call them that, each adjusted to their new roles in their own way. Damon thrived behind closed doors, managing negotiations like a tactician moving invisible armies across a board no one else could see. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was because a senator folded exactly when he expected them to. Leo became the public face of our new alliance. He held press briefings, hosted diplomats, and flashed a carefully curated sincerity that made even skeptics soften. He was still charming, but now his charm was weaponized for something greater than vanity. Rafe practically vanished from palace grounds, embedding himself in the outer districts. His reports came in through coded letters, dispatches about unrest, corruption, progress. I trusted him more than I should have. Maybe because he was the only one who never once asked me to be something I wasn't. And Cashin stayed near. He never assumed. Never pushed. But when I needed space, he guarded the door. And when I needed silence, he sat with me in it. I didn't have a throne. I didn't want one. But I had a place now. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was pretending to deserve it. Still, there was one loose thread. The real Eliza Marin. I hadn't forgotten her. I couldn't. The truth was, she'd never been missing. She'd been dead for over 6 months. A carriage accident outside the capital, quick, brutal, and quietly buried. Her family had covered it up, bribed the press, and quietly pushed the paperwork through to maintain their status. They needed their name on the match. So they bought a replacement. Me. A desperate family had made me their ghost. But whoever had pushed me through the algorithm, whoever had rewritten the code, had done so with purpose far beyond a name. They hadn't wanted a silent placeholder. They'd wanted a wildfire. And I wanted to know who. Mara helped. I'd reinstated her under my personal protection, and after everything, she gave me the last piece of the puzzle. The original override had come from inside the palace. Not a noble house. Not a rival faction. Not even the Queen. Cashin. I found him alone in the garden at dusk, just as the shadows began to stretch long across the marble paths. He knew why I was there. He didn't try to deflect. You rewrote the algorithm, I said. Yes. You inserted me. Yes. Why? He stood still for a long moment. Then he looked at me, not with guilt, not even apology. With something that burned deeper. Because the system was rigged, he said. Because every match before you ended in power consolidations and silent coups. Because I knew the only way to break it was to put someone in the middle who didn't care about any of it. Someone who would destroy the game instead of trying to win it. You used me. I chose you. His words hit like lightning. Not cold. Not cruel. But true. And complicated. I should have been furious. Maybe I was. But I also understood. He hadn't picked me to hurt me. He'd picked me because I was the only one who could do what needed to be done. You should have told me, I whispered. I didn't know if you'd survive it. I didn't either. We stood in silence as the wind swept through the trees. I'm not your match, I said finally. I never wanted a match, he said. I wanted a reckoning. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared out at the skyline of the capital, lit with distant towers and glowing airships, and realized I had become something the palace couldn't contain. The girl who wasn't meant to be here had rewritten the story. They thought the system had failed. But it had finally worked, for someone like me. And I wasn't finished yet. 6 weeks after the ceremony, the palace still hadn't recovered from the aftershocks. The match had been dismantled, the council purged, and the Queen, though still seated on the throne, had been stripped of much of her unchecked power. Every headline called it the era of reform. But no one dared say my name too loudly in the press. I was still the anomaly they couldn't explain. The symbol of a system that had cracked in front of the world. And behind closed doors, some still whispered about how to erase me before I did more damage. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I was rebuilding the palace from the inside out. Every week, I replaced another relic of the old regime. Out went the bloodline-only policies and the inheritance-based appointments. In came transparency, open education mandates, and outreach to the outer districts. I held audiences with people who'd never set foot near the throne room before. Workers, teachers, farmers, messengers. People who reminded me of who I really was. But power, even when used with good intentions, made people restless. There were rumors of a splinter faction. Nobles who wanted the match reinstated. Who claimed I'd corrupted the sanctity of tradition. They met in private estates and whispered about legacy and bloodlines and keeping the throne pure. Damon intercepted one of their messages. He handed it to me without a word. "They're planning something," he said. "Soon." Leo had already warned me. "They'll strike in public," he'd said. "They want to discredit you in front of the people. Make you look weak. Alone." Rafe returned from the border with bruises and a broken communicator. "They're arming themselves," he told me. "Smuggling weapons through trade routes. Preparing for a coup." I gathered the four of them in the same room, the same war room where everything had started. "We end this," I said. "Together." Cashin nodded once. "How?" I looked at each of them. These men who had once been my suitors. Now my allies. My mirrors. My sharpest tools. "We give them what they want," I said. A spectacle. The plan was dangerous. And theatrical. I would announce a final match, a symbolic choice, live, with the entire kingdom watching. A staged return to tradition. The nobles would gather, smug and expectant, believing they had won. Believing I had folded. But the moment they tried to seize power, to object, to step forward and reclaim their old roles, we would have every name, every face, every piece of evidence streamed to every district screen in the kingdom. We wouldn't just expose them. We would end them. The night of the announcement, the palace shimmered with artificial light. Banners flew. Trumpets blared. And for the first time since the match began, I stepped into the center of the ballroom without fear. The suitors stood where they once had, each one dressed in their house colors, each one complicit in what we were about to do. I turned to the crowd. "For too long," I said, "this tradition has been used as a cage. A crown given not to the worthy, but to the connected. That ends tonight." Gasps rippled. Nobles shifted uncomfortably. I looked at Damon. "You taught me strategy." Leo. "You taught me how to speak so they'd listen." Rafe. "You showed me what loyalty looks like when it's earned, not demanded." Cashin. "And you gave me the truth, even when it cost you everything." I turned back to the audience. "My choice is not one man. My choice is the future. And none of you will stand in its way." Right on cue, the nobles who opposed me stood. Spoke. Shouted. And then the palace doors locked. Live feeds played across the ballroom walls, intercepted plans, recordings, confessions, proof of conspiracy. The people watched. The world watched. The coup collapsed in real time. When it was over, there was no crown on my head. No title etched into gold. But there was silence. And then, applause. Real, thunderous applause. I didn't choose a suitor. I didn't need to. They had chosen me. As something bigger than a match. As the one who ended the game for good. Later, in the quiet of the royal garden, Cashin found me alone. "You did it," he said. "We did." He stepped closer. "So what now?" I looked at him. At all we'd been through, at what we'd burned and built. "Now," I said, "we write new rules." He didn't smile. He kissed me. And this time, it wasn't for cameras, or strategy, or power. It was real. Not a beginning. Not an ending. Just everything I'd earned. 6 months later, the kingdom looked nothing like the one that had chosen me by mistake. The crown match was officially abolished. In its place, we built a new council. One elected, one diverse, one impossible to rig with algorithms and bloodlines. Education centers were rising in outer districts where royal carriages used to speed past without stopping. Laws were rewritten, old debts forgiven, and trade opened across borders once locked by legacy. I never claimed a title. I didn't need to. I wasn't queen, consort, or any other name they'd tried to fit me into. I was just Eliza. The glitch in the system that rewrote the program entirely. The four who once competed for my hand were no longer rivals, or symbols, or players in someone else's game. Damon served as high strategist on the new council, the youngest member by decades and the most feared behind closed doors. He never spoke for the sake of speaking, but when he did, entire policies shifted. Leo left the palace, oddly enough. He chose to travel, speaking to the people directly, from district to district. His charisma turned to advocacy, his charm into something unshakable. I watched from afar as he smiled on holoscreens with dirt on his boots and children tugging at his sleeves. Rafe ran security for the entire southern border now. His name became legend in outposts that had once been forgotten. He still sent me handwritten updates. They never started with "Dear Eliza," and they never signed off. But they always found their way to my desk. And Cashin. Cashin stayed. We never labeled it. Never carved it into the stone walls of the palace. But he was there in the mornings when I woke to briefing alerts and needed 5 minutes of silence before facing the weight of the world. He was there when my hands shook behind closed doors and when I doubted whether I'd truly changed anything at all. He never told me what I should be. He just stood beside me while I became it. The nobles never got their match back. But sometimes, I saw them watching me at council gatherings, at public forums, at ceremonial events I never asked for. And I knew what they were thinking. She shouldn't have been here. She wasn't chosen. But they were wrong. I was chosen, just not by them. I was chosen by the chaos they feared. The future they tried to prevent. The truth they buried until it grew too loud to silence. And even though I hadn't wanted any of this, I had made it mine. The girl who had once spilled cereal on her front steps in District 12 was now rewriting the laws of an empire. Not as a symbol. Not as a bride. But as a storm that refused to be caged. And I wasn't done yet. A year passed. The palace no longer glittered with the same false gold. Its halls were quieter, not because the power had lessened, but because the noise had become purposeful. Gone were the parades for tradition's sake, the empty ceremonies, the camera-staged kisses. In their place came council sessions that stretched past midnight, debates streamed live to citizens, decisions signed not by royal decree but by public consensus. I walked those halls now not as an outsider, but as the one who had stripped the wallpaper bare and rebuilt it with my own hands. Still, not everyone approved. The nobles who survived the fallout had not vanished. They had simply changed tactics, smiles sharpened, loyalties twisted into polite resistance. They called me reformist in public and rebel in private. They toasted my name while quietly feeding new threats beneath the surface. Not a war. Not yet. But a new breed of unrest. Damon warned me first. They're regrouping, he said, laying down intercepted transmissions like playing cards. They'll come back with laws, not armies. I believed him. So we moved fast. We pushed through the succession reform bill, removing inheritance as the sole qualifier for council seats. Then the transparency edict, opening all trade agreements to public review. By the time the old guard realized what was happening, the very ground beneath them had shifted. Leo returned briefly for the vote, his presence enough to sway 3 swing states. He met me after in the South Gardens. For once, he looked tired. I miss when I was just trying to win you, he said, half laughing. You weren't really trying to win me, I said. He smiled. No. You were too busy winning yourself. We stood there for a long time, 2 people who had played a game no one fully understood, and survived it anyway. Rafe arrived 2 days later with news from the border. The resistance wasn't dead, but it was scattered, disorganized. He grinned as he dropped a stack of names on my desk. Traitors, smugglers, ex-nobles in exile. And the fool who tried to fund them all with royal jewels. Should we return the favor? No, I said. Let them watch what we build. Cashin never left my side. In public, he stood a step behind me, armed, unreadable. In private, he was different. Steady. Quiet. A constant. I had grown used to his presence the way I once needed air. One night, I asked him what would have happened if the algorithm hadn't chosen me. If he hadn't changed it. If I'd never walked into that palace in borrowed silk and panicked resolve. He didn't answer right away. I would have watched the match play out, he said slowly. And I would have watched the kingdom fall apart, one noble lie at a time. And now? I asked. Now, he said, I watch you. Later, as we stood on the royal balcony overlooking the capital. Its skyline no longer distant, but alive with light and motion, I realized something. I hadn't just survived the match. I'd transformed it into a warning. A story whispered to future generations about what happens when a system forgets that real power doesn't come from bloodlines or banners or algorithms. It comes from the people it tries to ignore. It comes from the girl who wasn't supposed to be chosen. The one who was never meant to win. And did anyway. I wasn't the prize. I was the ending. And the beginning after it.